So good morning, everybody, and welcome to the next in our episode of our Agency Masters webinar series. Today's session, we're looking at mastering your project financials. Now, as usual, the session should last around 20 to 22 minutes. And today's session will be covering things like why profitable project delivery is the engine that powers everything, practical techniques to build accurate estimates that account for the realities of your creative work, how to quote profitably and add the right buffers, the warning signs that your project might be heading off budget, and what to do when things do go sideways. Now, as usual, before we start, for those who don't know me or haven't joined any of our previous webinars, I'm Steve. I'm one of the co-founders here at the Agency Works. Been working with agencies for well over 24 years now. And as usual, I'm joined by my colleague and webinar host, Kate, who is
Hello.
not only a principal consultant at the Agency Works, but has also had many years' experience working with multiple agencies in both operations and client services roles. So let's get started. So we know that familiar scenario: a client asks for just one small change and you say, sure, no problem. And then 6 hours of design later, you're trying to explain to a director why the budget's blown. Or maybe you've confidently quoted a project only to realize halfway through that you forgot to factor in QA time. So we've all been there, that sinking feeling that when numbers aren't adding up and the budget quietly disappears. But profitability isn't just something that the finance team worries about or something that only matters to directors. It's in agencies, profitability is a team sport and everybody's a player. So whether you're managing a project, planning a campaign, or building a client relationship, the decisions that you make every day impact time, scope, and ultimately the bottom line. So when we all think about how to deliver great work efficiently and within scope, we don't just protect your agency, we create space for better pay, bonuses hopefully, and headcount and growth.
Sounds good. And it's a simple formula. So, project profit is your revenue minus any costs to deliver. So that would be your time, your purchases, and your expenses. And there's no simple trick to running a profitable project. It's about getting a few core things right. So profitable pricing. So it all starts here. If your quote doesn't reflect the real time, effort, and value involved, you're setting yourself up for a loss before the work even begins. And cost management. So whether it's freelancers, third-party costs or expenses, making sure you're quoted properly and keeping an eye on the actual spend avoids any sneaky leaks. And scope creep. So that can we add just one more thing, those famous last words. So a clear scope of work and confident conversations protect both your time and your margins. And last but not least, efficient delivery. So even the best planned project can tank if delivery is messy. Using your team's time wisely basically equals profit protection. You've all seen this meme before. It's been going around for a long, long time, but I have to say I love it. It's just always really good. Your client, the scenario, your client gives you a brief and a budget, and they don't quite match. So as you can see, what tends to happen is the client wants way more work than they can actually afford. And that's why it's so important to start the project with an estimate and a quote. And you may not realise it, but an estimate and a quote are two very different things. Hopefully you will all know that, but we bang on about it quite a lot, don't we, Steve?
Yep.
So your estimate is your internal assessment of your resources needed. And this is the true time and cost of what it's going to take to deliver that piece of work. Whereas your quote is your commercial decision on what you're actually going to charge the client.
So why does good estimating matter? Sounds a bit silly, but it is important. But we've picked out a few reasons why that is important. The first thing to do is this is about knowing what type of resources you'll need to deliver the brief over what period of time. So this is a much more long-term view of what months the work needs to be delivered in. This also ties in with your estimate being linked to scheduling. So this is a much more short-term process. So resourcing the estimated hours and allocating work directly into staff calendars will hopefully avoid your team going over budget. Yeah, also, especially if the client is paying based on perhaps a time and material basis, what is the value of the estimate? And if we manage to invoice this, what would our gross or net profit be? And if we know that, then in turn, we'll be able to forecast this and be able to work out your revenue forecast, as well as forecasting your costs or your purchases, which in turn can help manage cash flow. Also, it helps you track against delivery. So if you can burn down the hours and you perhaps use 50% of your time, are you actually 50% the way through completion? It also helps manage and drive utilization. Some of you may have seen we've recently done a case study, which you can get on the Sensis website for an agency in Chester called Armstrong B2B, about how accurate estimating helped them improve their utilization rates. As overestimating can see resources sitting around doing nothing, whereas underestimating can see your studio feeling stressed and burnt out. And finally, it's about continuity across the agency. So everybody using the same template or basing new jobs on previous estimates. This can help improve reporting if you have this consistent approach, i.e. not having different staff creating estimates in different ways. But it's all about learning lessons.
And with that in mind, here are some top tips for getting your estimate right. So first one, be clear on the scope. Are you going, be sure you're asking your client the correct questions. Don't be afraid to ask your team what questions they'd be asking and what needs to be done. So check with your team. And then also speak to your delivery team and use their experience to learn what's needed and ask them to consider any risks. Break down the tasks and ask your team to estimate each task and explain their rationale behind it. And think about creating a pessimistic, standard, and optimistic estimate. So you're pessimistic, obviously, if everything goes wrong. Your standard is if everything just goes perfectly as you expect, and your optimistic is if everything goes brilliantly well and you end up making more profit on the project. And look at similar projects. What time and resources did you actually use to get that piece of work through? And consider the client. Does the client always ask for extra amends, or maybe they've got lots of stakeholders that you've got to consider? And the last one there is allow for lots of amends. Allow for too many, and then you hopefully will be in the right ballpark. And an important thing also to consider is not retrofitting your estimate to your quote. So, for example, your client has £1,000 to spend and your general charge codes are £100 an hour, say, so you estimate 10 hours of time. But realistically, maybe you need 15 hours of time. So make sure you're not doing that.
Absolutely. Okay, so once you have an accurate estimate, you can decide then what to quote. So how to go about getting your quote right? Well, as Kate mentioned, the first thing we want to probably do is start with accurate estimating. You want to make sure your quote is always equal to or more than the estimate if you're looking to break even. Buffers, and this is to account for the complexity and risks. So do we need to flex on the budget? I think it's easier sometimes to charge less than have to go back to the client for more budget, which in turn hopefully helps you keep your clients happy. Something we're seeing more and more these days, your estimate or your quote doesn't have to be the same as your estimate because you're selling value, not time. And then, as Kate mentioned there, giving 3 options, perhaps having 3 different quotes, the good, the better, and the best. And when you're doing that, consider the 3 Fs, the fun, the fame, and the fortune. What are we doing this work for? And does it fit into one of those 3 categories? Because that might have an impact in terms of how much we charge that piece of work for.
Always a good analogy, that one, Ben.
Absolutely.
So you've estimated accurately and quoted profitability, but where could it all go wrong? So, well, we all know that lingering around every project corner is the dreaded scope creep. If it happens, it's going to take you over budget and delay any other work that's coming in. And it might feel easier to carry on to keep the client happy. But if you do, you're going to lose control of the project and lose the profit you've worked so hard to estimate and quote.
And that is true, and it's backed up by this stat. So according to the Project Management Institute, around 50% of agency projects head out of scope, with nearly 40% of those going over budget as a result of that.
Yes, that's a scary stat, I think. And here's another one for you. If you go over by just 1 hour on each project, say 20 projects a month, that's potential revenue loss of potentially £2,000 every month. Puts that sort of just that's only an hour into perspective. It also, and to put it another way, as it states on this dreaded meme of myself, that pic has found its way into
It's
another
in every
webinar.
webinar, Kate,
Yeah,
isn't
I
it?
know,
Yeah,
I
we need a new
know.
one.
If you overservice by 10%, you're effectively working for free for 6-ish weeks of the year. And as you can see by my face, that's another very scary stat.
Absolutely. So those boundaries are really important. So what we've seen and heard in our time working with agencies is the flip side of all those yeses and the real impact of scope creep. And we've picked out a few more for you too. The obvious one, absolutely, it will reduce profit margins. Your bottom line will take a hit. Costs going up or the additional time and resource being pulled in means you can often say goodbye to your profitability and often hello to a loss. Yeah, deadline wise, well, there are also so many components behind project success, and when things start to head off track, it can set everything else off. And of course, there are more variables to worry about than that. Within that, you've got things like annual leave, availability of resource, etc. Also, yeah, capacity wise, when work is delayed, it does tie up your team's time and capacity, eating into hours needed for new projects. It's not just project success at risk, it's your agency's overall momentum. So your team ends up rushing to make time up, and the quality you're known for suddenly starts to slip away. Everybody feels busy, but nothing's actually getting finished, just carried out from one week to the next. Yeah, this is an important one. I think it sets the tone for the entire client relationship. So what might feel like a one-off favor to you can quickly become the norm to your clients. So suddenly that extra round of amends that Kate mentioned are expected and deadlines start to lose their meaning. It also eats into time that you potentially should be spending on growth. So if you're tied up delivering a project that should have been wrapped up 2 weeks ago, you're missing chances to check in with existing clients, share new ideas, or simply drive forward your new business pipeline. Also, your agency is your people and they're the ones doing the work. So if they're stuck in a project that's drifted far from the original brief, dealing with frustrated clients and consistent changes, the passion quickly fades. And when that goes, so does the quality you're known for. And an unhappy team isn't just less productive, they're less engaged, less creative, and more likely to leave.
So that's the impact, but let's rewind. What are the causes behind scope creep and where does it all go wrong? So the obvious one, amends, doing 15 rounds instead of the scoped 3. We've all been there. Too many stakeholders, both client and agency side. Make sure you are gathering all the amends before you put them through to your resource team. They will thank you for it, believe me. Unclear and changing briefs. So this is always a hot topic. But once a scope is agreed, any brief changes need to have a scope change too. And underestimating. So to talk to your team, doing the work when you're putting your estimate and your scope together. Make sure you're giving them enough time and remember the difference between an estimate and the commercial quote that I mentioned earlier. Poor management or processes, of course, the processes have to be there in the first place, but then making sure that the junior team members are supported within them. And miscommunication. So this boils down to proper project planning. Remember, what looks good for one person might be completely different for another. So make sure everyone is on the same page. So and lack of team training. So this doesn't have to be formal training, although it can, and we can recommend some partners that can help you with that. But also make sure your junior team are supported and mentored in the hows and whens of your agency processes. Perfectionism or innovation. So I think I've told you the story before, Steve, of the dev. I left to get on with a project without having any sort of proper check-ins. And what he delivered was a thing of beauty, but way, way out of scope. And we all know that all creatives want perfection, but it's not always what the client has paid for. And lastly, lack of commerciality. So we've touched on this in previous webinars, which you can find on our YouTube channel. But if your CS team don't have commercial awareness, then when the extra hour here and there that it happen, they don't matter. Your team need to understand the commerciality of the agency.
Absolutely. So we've looked at the causes of scope creep. Now let's look how we might avoid over budgeting projects. We've gone, and Kate mentioned previous webinars, we've done a webinar all about this, but I think this is really important to start from the scratch. So getting better briefs and agreeing scope of work. Be completely clear on the brief, making sure that we're asking the right questions up front. We talked previously about asking for more clarity and asking why 5 times. We need to be completely clear of absolutely what the scope of work is up front before we start.
Absolutely. And be clear on what is classed as an amend versus a change. So you need to try and keep to the agreed amount of amends. But also, if the amend is so large it actually equals a change, you could potentially need to rescope the project.
We touched on this earlier, but it is really quite key to managing project budgets. Your estimate is your internal facing document and should reflect how long something is actually going to take, so you're being a bit more honest. Whereas your quote is commercially what you can charge for that piece of work.
And book your resources based on your budget. So if your team told you a task will take 6 hours, book the 6 hours. Don't under or overbook, as you're then going to create pressure and potential to overrun.
Quite a key one for us, as you'd imagine. Real-time tracking. So obviously we use Synergist to monitor estimated versus actual time and costs as your project progresses. It gives you a live view of how far through a project is, helping you make more informed and have more informed conversations about whether there's enough time and resource left to deliver the project properly.
And regular work in progress reviews will enable you to check work is on track and on brief. So potentially a regular daily sort of stand-up meeting with everyone in a very, very short meeting, and just ask 3 questions. So what did you do yesterday? What are you doing today? And what issues might be blocking us? And depending on the project, you might want to share a daily or a weekly update on what's done, what's happening, and what's next. Any issues or risks.
And finally, ask for written feedback, then follow up with a conversation. Where possible, get written feedback first, then set up a call to discuss it. Document everything clearly so it can be shared with the wider team. So this is not only helps everybody understand what went well and what you can improve, but also strengthens your position as a strategic partner, showing the client that their input is also valued. However, the reality is sometimes things do go wrong. So what should we do about it? Well, if you know it's underquoted before you start, plan for it. If the project is going to go over, speak to your team and client. Can you do anything about it? We need to reframe your thinking. Is this an opportunity to upsell? Is there a gap for potential new revenue add-ons, additional services that you can add to your offering? But ultimately, your profit margins don't have to take a hit. If it's already happened, learn from it. And as you can see, there's a great quote from Carl Sackers, who we reference on a lot of our webinars. To keep top of your mind, be strategically free, not secretly free. And that's about letting the client know you've underquoted or you've gone over. And that will enable you, hopefully, to charge the correct amount the next time. So it's all about open, honest communication. But what should we do if we have underestimated? As I mentioned there, the first thing I would talk about is acknowledging it early. So as soon as you realize the workload exceeds your estimate, bring it up. Don't wait until deadlines are missed or quality is compromised. Your clients will appreciate transparency and professionalism over surprises. Next, take a detailed look at the project deliverables versus your original assumptions. Identify where and why the scope was underestimated. Is it a misunderstood brief? Was it added complexity? Or is it, as Kate mentioned before, the dreaded scope creep? Then, before reaching out to our client, get your facts straight. Be ready with a breakdown of what's changed or been discovered and why it affects the timeline or budget. Then we can look at options to move forward. This might be a revised quote, perhaps a more phased delivery, or potentially a scope reduction. But this should be documented and agreed. We need to communicate transparently with the client. Frame the conversation around shared goals. Explain what's needed to maintain the quality and integrity of the project, but focus on solutions. Your client will respond better if you show that you're invested in delivering value. So maybe consider absorbing minor overruns as a gesture of goodwill, or potentially offering revised costs or timelines where needed. But ultimately, we need to use experience to refine your estimating methods and brief intake process and internal checks to identify what slipped through. So was it a vague brief? Was it a rush quote? Or was it just down to a lack of technical input?
Yeah, it's easy for us to sit here and say that you need to have difficult conversations and stuff, but I think a good technique to use if you do need to have them is the yes and technique. So start conversations on a positive note rather than a negative. The and amplifies the next positive to come through rather than the but, which is a negative and potentially could get their back up. So good examples of this on the screen there. So yes, that's a great addition. Leave it with me and I'll review if we can fit it in and we'll get back to you. Or yes, we can include that addition and keep the project on track. We could trade it for X or we could add it to phase 2, that kind of thing. And always remember, I think this is Cole Sakis as well. I think we love Cole Sakis on this webinar. You can always use the 7 magic words, which would be, would you like an estimate with that?
It's amazing how things become unimportant when you put a pound note sign against it, isn't it?
Absolutely.
As usual, that kind of we're up to the end of the 20 minutes now brings us to the close of the webinar. As usual, we'd like to leave you with our 3 key takeaways. We've covered quite a lot on today's session. I would say the first one for me is understanding how your work impacts the bottom line, because delivering great creative means nothing if the project will lose money.
And second there, remember your estimate is different from your quote. So your estimate is your internal facing document, basically what it will take you to deliver the work. Whereas your quote is your client facing document and the agency's commercial decision on what to charge the client.
And finally, clients don't just want delivery, they want thinking, insight, and somebody who understands their business as well as their brief.